And I want to go right to that word that President Biden used twice that raises an interesting question about how this was discussed during the meeting with the War Cabinet. He said, we had a long talk about possible invasion of Gaza. And he said, and what alternatives there are. Our military is talking with their military about what the alternatives might be. What do you think those alternatives could be that they were discussing?
Hi, Lawrence. Good to be with you. Good night. Good morning here in Tel Aviv. Okay, the president made it very clear that by using the term, by his choice of words, alternatives, he means I'm not happy with, I'm not supportive of, and I don't think it's such a great idea to mount a large-scale ground operation. He warned last week, by the way, both on television and in the White House speech, that a prolonged ground operation would bog Israel down in Gaza and lead almost inevitably to the reoccupation or recapture. And we know what the human cost of both sides is. So here he was referring to alternatives. There are 3 or 4 alternatives. One is to refrain from a ground operation altogether, meaning continue with the precision munitions, aerial bombardments, and targeted assassinations or targeted killings. The second would be smaller scale incursions just in the north or central parts or districts of the Gaza Strip. And, you know, we're talking about Gaza. Gaza is not the state of Texas. It's a small place. It's a very dense place. The densest place on planet Earth with 2.3, almost 2.3 million people. So even a limited incursion could get complicated and could get muddy and nasty. A third option, which he did not raise to the best of my knowledge, certainly not publicly, would be to just stop. You know, it's not popular. The blood is boiling. You know, you want to exact justice for the atrocities of Saturday, October 7th, but just stop right now because there are hostages involved. 199 is the official count, of which I think about 20 or 25 are American nationals. And the fourth option is, you know, quell this down, begin negotiations, but while you're at it, continue on with precise or targeted killings of heads of the Hamas. None of these are good options. None of these, including that is, of course, a ground operation. So when he said alternatives, I don't know that he was offering anything specific. Maybe his military team, his defense specialists are. But when he said find an alternative, he just basically admitted, Lawrence, that there are no good options here.
Let me go back to one of the options you mentioned, which is the just stop, which I think in the United States, if you follow the language of some of the demonstrators who've been in the streets, calling for a ceasefire. Is there an option that is essentially a ceasefire that then concentrates on some kind of negotiation for hostages?
Yeah, I mean, the option is there, but there's a qualitative difference because of the scale and the magnitude of what happened on Saturday, October 7th, 10 days ago. This was so devastating and so shocking that I think this alternative, at this point at least, is not seriously weighed by Israel. It's not seriously considered as a viable option at this point. Now, both of us may understand the logic, or our viewers indeed can understand the logic of just stopping right now. But this is a non-state actor. This is a terrorist organization, as President Biden said, capable of unadulterated evil, ISIS-style executions and indiscriminate murder. So I think the impetus, the motivation, the self-justification to just stop now doesn't exist. On the other hand, it's going to have to, I mean, this option will have to be weighed at some point, because the alternative is to bring down Hamas, and Israel has been using all these, euphemisms and synonyms: eradicate and obliterate and dismantle and unseat. they all involve almost invariably, they all involve a major ground operation, which is what Biden warned against. So while that option makes sense, it just, it's almost unnatural to think that anyone is weighing it at this point seriously.
I want to listen to something the president said today about a two-state solution. Let's listen to this.
As hard as it is, we must keep pursuing peace. We must keep pursuing a path so that Israel and the Palestinian people can both live safely, in security, in dignity, and in peace. For me, that means a two-state solution.
That phrase, two-state solution, is not something we've been hearing a lot in Israel in recent years.
No, well, not at all. I mean, the term two-state solution not only disappeared from the political jargon and political discourse, but it's been heralded as a, no longer viable option, a dead solution, not feasible, not acceptable. Now, this has been American policy consistently since Bill Clinton. When he published his following Camp David in July of 2000, he then published the Clinton Parameters. That spoke of two states. George W. Bush spoke of two states. Barack Obama, whose vice president was Joe Biden, of course, spoke of the two-state solution as the preferred option from an American point of view. Even Donald Trump did. And now Biden is speaking about it. But you have to understand, Lawrence, even if Israel will entertain the option as the only, is not a great option, but as the only workable solution in the long run, the events of October 7th preclude that and more or less take it off the table in the immediate time frame. Because people are going to say, naturally, they're going to say, look what happened in Gaza on October 7th. Do you seriously think Israel will now allow for a Palestinian state to be established on 90 or 95% of the West Bank? We're going to have these October 7th incidents on a weekly or monthly basis. So that's going to be off the table. But in the slightly longer run, Lawrence, Israel is going to have to go back to that option because the alternative is going to be a one-state model, meaning a binational state in which there is a population equilibrium, a demographic equilibrium, 50% Jews, 50% Palestinian Arabs between the Mediterranean Sea on the west and the Jordan River on the east. So I think this will re-enter public discourse. However, I don't know if you were going to go into that, Lawrence. However, this necessitates not only seriousness on the part of the Palestinians, but to be honest, this will require a completely different Israeli government, a government led by Mr. Netanyahu with the right-wing lunatics, fanatics, and messianic people that he built his coalition with. That this government is never going to contemplate seriously a two-state solution or enter negotiations. I think, though, if I may add one more thing, I think that Biden is smartly thinking of the day after, meaning that while America didn't want to get involved, while America doesn't want to play intermediary again for the umpteenth time in the last 30 years, this crisis may provide, difficult to even use the word right now, but it may provide a silver lining in terms of a final realization that the two-state solution needs to be back on the table and needs to be seriously considered.